My father warned me that the heat from the forge was nothing compared to the fire in my blood. He said to pray that no alpha ever noticed the silver glint in my eyes. But as the Alpha King's shadow fell across my anvil, I knew my time hiding in the ashes was over. Chapter 1. The Weight of Steel and Hope. The rhythm of the forge was the only prayer I knew. Thud. The hammer fell, shaping the glowing steel on the anvil. Hiss. The metal plunged into the quenching barrel, steam ghosting towards the rafters like a fleeting soul. Clang. The tongs set the cooling blade aside. It was a language of force and fire, the only one where I felt fluent. The only place where an Omega like me could be a creator instead of a servant. My world was this small, smoky space because beyond its doors, I was breakable. Here, I broke things and remade them stronger. Following the scent of wood smoke, the voices of the other girls drifted in from the clearing. Their words were light, airy things, so different from the solid weight of steel in my hands. "Did you see Damon this morning?" Lyra's voice was like honey, thick and sweet. "He was sparring with the pack warriors. My brother said he disarmed the beta in 3 moves. 3! The elder believes his wolf is the most powerful to emerge in a generation." Another girl, Ilara, sighed. "Whoever he chooses tonight will be the envy of the entire pack. To be the mate of the future alpha, and can you even imagine it?" Oh, I could. I imagined it every time I quenched a blade, the hiss of the water whispering his name. I let myself imagine it because of one stolen moment last spring by the creek. He'd found me sketching designs in the mud, and instead of scoffing, he'd watched, his eyes curious. He'd asked me what I was making, his voice low and rough, and for a breath, I wasn't a blacksmith's daughter. I was just Celine. That single memory was the ember I'd stoked for months, a secret fire I was sure would finally be seen tonight. Because of that moment, I believed he saw the more in me. Consequently, every strike of my hammer today felt different. It was both a hope and a farewell. This was the last blade I would forge as an unmated Omega, the last piece I would create in the shadows. I worked faster, the muscles in my arms burning, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. To be strong, to be chosen, to be seen. That was the desperate prayer hammered into the steel. Finally, it was done. A dagger, perfectly balanced, its edge sharp enough to split a hair. I polished its surface until it shone like a dark mirror. A stranger stared back at me, a girl with soot on her cheek and wild, dark hair escaping its braid. But it was her eyes that held me. They were just brown, mostly. In the firelight, though, a flicker of something else shimmered in their depths. A glint of silver, dangerous and ancient. A heavy hand landed on my shoulder and I jumped, the dagger clattering to the stone floor. "Celine." My father's voice was a low rumble. He bent to retrieve the blade, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle. He held it up, his expression a painful mix of pride and a deep, sorrowful worry that I could never understand. That look was an open question I was too afraid to ask. He didn't speak of the dagger. Instead, he held out a bundle of drab brown cloth. "For the ceremony," he murmured, his gaze falling away from my own. It wasn't the deep blue dress I had saved for, the one that matched the wildflowers by the creek. It was plain, subdued, a dress designed to make a girl disappear, and as I took it, the weight of his fear felt heavier than the hammer in my hand. Chapter 2. The Scent of Frost and Fate. The ceremony grounds buzzed with a nervous energy that tasted like ozone in the air. A massive bonfire roared at the center of the clearing, its hungry flames casting dancing shadows against the faces of the pack. The scents were overwhelming, roasting boar, pine from the forest, and the sharp, anxious musk of 100 shifters, all waiting for fate to call their name. In my drab brown dress, I felt like a withered leaf in a field of wildflowers. I was invisible, and I knew it was because my father had wanted it that way. As a result of my plain appearance, the other Omegas, dressed in vibrant colors, barely glanced at me. They huddled in their own circles, whispering and giggling, their eyes darting towards the circle of unmated alphas and betas. One by one, the elder, a stooped wolf with eyes as old as the mountains, would call out a name. An alpha would step forward, meet the gaze of his chosen, and a bond would snap into place. A silent, sacred promise witnessed by the moon goddess herself. With every pairing, the knot in my stomach tightened. Lyra was chosen by a broad-shouldered beta, her face glowing with a joy so pure it was painful to watch. I saw relief. I saw happiness. I saw futures beginning all around me. What if my future never began? What if that moment by the creek meant nothing to him? My inner wolf, usually a quiet, dormant thing, began to stir, a faint, defiant hum vibrating deep in my chest. It was a feeling I always pushed down, a secret strength I was taught to fear. And then he arrived. Damon moved through the crowd not like he was a part of it, but like he was its center. Tall and powerful, with dark hair that caught the firelight and eyes the color of warm whiskey, he was everything an alpha was meant to be. He was confidence in motion. He was the strength that promised safety. He was the future of our pack. He carried the hopes of everyone here on his shoulders, and he did it with an easy grace that made my heart ache. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, he scanned the anxious faces of the unmated Omegas. My breath caught in my throat. He wouldn't see me. He couldn't. The brown dress was a shroud, making me a part of the shadows, a nobody. My hands clenched at my sides, my short nails digging into my palms. See me, I prayed, a desperate, silent plea sent out into the crackling night. Please, just see me. As if he'd heard the desperate cry of my soul, his gaze swept past me, then snapped back. His eyes found mine. A slow, confident smile spread across his handsome face, a smile that promised everything I had ever dreamed of. The world fell away. The bonfire, the pack, the entire forest. It all disappeared. There was only the warmth in his eyes and the silent promise of his smile. He took a single, deliberate step in my direction. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild drum beating out a rhythm of pure, unadulterated hope. This was it. It was real. Just as he started to move with purpose, a sound cut through the celebration. It wasn't a wolf. It was a horn. A deep, mournful blast that echoed from the northern mountains. It was followed by a howl, a sound so filled with ancient power and chilling authority that the bonfire itself seemed to shrink from its force. A hush fell over the pack. The celebration died instantly, and a new scent filled the air, the scent of pine, and a gathering winter storm. Chapter 3. The Shadow of the King. The silence that followed the howl was a living thing. It was heavier than stone, colder than the night air. Everyone froze, their joy and anticipation replaced by a single, unified emotion: fear. Even our pack alpha, a formidable wolf in his own right, lowered his head, his posture shifting from leader to subordinate. The bonfire crackled, a lonely sound in the sudden, crushing stillness. They came not with a grand announcement, but like ghosts from the forest's edge. Emerging from the darkness, they were shadows on horseback, a hunting party of specters. At their lead rode the Alpha King, Kale Draven. He was more myth than man, a story told to frighten shifter pups. He was the king of all packs, a ruler whose name was synonymous with violence and conquest. He didn't look like a king in robes and jewels. He was a warrior clad in black leather and dark furs, his presence a physical force that demanded submission. His face was hard angles and cold indifference, and an aura of absolute power rolled off him in palpable waves. Because this was our reality, our pack was nothing to him. We were a remote territory, a speck on his vast map. His presence here felt like a violation, like a hawk circling a mouse's nest. He had no reason to be here, unless something was terribly wrong. My Omega instincts, the ones that urged me to be meek and unnoticed, screamed at me, disappear, be small, do not be seen. I tried to shrink behind Alara, to blend into the terrified crowd, to become nothing more than a brown smudge in the firelight. The king's gaze swept over us. It was not the gaze of a man looking at people, it was the look of a predator assessing a herd, dismissing the weak, searching for something. What could he possibly be looking for here? His eyes passed over our alpha, over the elders, over Damon, who stood frozen between me and the king's party. Nothing. No one seemed to warrant his attention. Then his eyes stopped. They were the color of a winter sky just before a blizzard, a pale, merciless gray. And they were locked on me. It couldn't have been for more than a second, a single heartbeat, but time stretched and warped. The world narrowed to the space between us. There was no warmth in his gaze, no curiosity. It was a look of cold, sharp assessment, as if he were peeling back my skin to see the secrets of my bones. It was the most terrifying moment of my life, because I felt utterly and completely seen. And in that terrifying moment, something impossible happened. The defiant hum of my inner wolf, the one I always suppressed, didn't cower. It rose up, a low, dangerous thrum that vibrated through my entire being, answering his silent challenge with one of its own. Just as quickly, he looked away. The connection shattered. Without a word, he spurred his horse, and the hunting party moved through the clearing, their passage a cold wind that extinguished the last of the festive warmth. They vanished back into the woods, leaving behind a silence thick with questions and fear. Slowly, the pack let out a collective breath. The elder cleared his throat, trying to restore order, but the magic of the night was broken. Damon, his face now pale and his eyes holding a strange, haunted look I'd never seen before, finally started moving again. Hope, fragile and wounded, fluttered back to life in my chest. He walked forward, his path direct and sure. Chapter 4, A Castoff Omega. He walked right past me. The two words echoed in the sudden vast emptiness of my mind. The world, which had narrowed to a single point of brilliant hope, fractured back into 1,000 sharp, painful pieces. I watched, frozen, as Damon stopped in front of Alara. She was the beta's daughter, with hair the color of summer wheat and eyes as blue as the sky. She was everything an Omega was supposed to be, soft and gentle and perfect. He reached out, his hand cupping her delicate jaw. A possessive, tender light entered his eyes. A light that was supposed to have been for me. Following his gesture, a collective sigh of approval rippled through the pack. The tension broke, replaced by murmurs and nods. It was a good match. A strong future alpha with a proper beta's daughter. It made sense. And I was the thing that made no sense. The whispers started then, slithering through the crowd like snakes in the grass. The blacksmith's girl. Did she really think? Look at her dress. An embarrassment. An Omega who spends her days with a hammer. Unnatural. Each word was a stone, and I was drowning under their weight. I looked at Damon one last time, a desperate, silent question in my eyes. Why? He met my gaze, and the confident alpha was gone. In his place was a boy, his whiskey-colored eyes filled not with pity, but with a raw, unmistakable terror. He opened his mouth, and the cruelest words I'd ever heard spilled out. I would never claim a cast-off Omega. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie, because the fear in his eyes was screaming a different story. But the pack didn't see that. They only heard the verdict. I was a cast-off, unwanted, worthless. The laughter started, quiet at first, then growing louder, a wave of ridicule that crashed over me, leaving me gasping for air. Our alpha stepped forward, his face grim. "The law is the law," he declared, his voice devoid of any warmth. "An unmated Omega cannot be a drain on the pack. You are cast out, Celine." I looked for my father in the crowd. He stood like a statue carved from grief, his face ashen, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched. This was the future he had feared for me, the one his sorrowful eyes had always promised. Why? Why was this happening? Consequently, hands were grabbing me. Rough hands, pushing me out of the firelight, away from the warmth, away from the only home I had ever known. The biting wind of a sudden storm hit me like a physical blow, whipping my hair across my face. Snowflakes, white and cold as ash, began to fall. The sounds of the ceremony, the laughter, the music, the life, faded behind me, replaced by the howl of the wind. My hope was dead. My place in the world was gone. All I had left was the cold and the desperate, furious whisper of my inner wolf, a voice I finally recognized as my own. Live. It was no longer a hum, it was a command. I stumbled into the growing blizzard, my only goal to take one more step and then another as the darkness closed in. Chapter 5. The scent of pine and winter warmth. That was the first thing I registered. A deep, impossible warmth that soaked into my bones, chasing away a cold so profound I thought it had become a part of me. The second thing was softness. I was lying on something impossibly soft, a cloud of down and silk that bore no resemblance to my rough straw mattress. My eyes fluttered open. A canopy of dark, rich velvet hung above me, and the air smelled of a crackling fire, dried herbs, and something else. Something familiar. Pine. And a gathering storm. Because my memory was a blur of ice and pain, the confusion was a thick fog in my mind. Where was I? The last thing I remembered was the snow. The relentless, biting snow and falling. Just falling. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. I was in a room. No, a chamber. It was larger than our entire cottage, with a roaring hearth carved from black stone and a thick fur rug spread across the floor. A high, arched window showed nothing but a swirling vortex of white. The blizzard was still raging. I should be dead. So why wasn't I? A new feeling, sharp and unwelcome, pushed through the fog. Suspicion. This wasn't a rescue born of kindness. Kindness didn't live in a place this opulent and severe. This was a cage, a gilded, comfortable cage, but a cage nonetheless. My survival instinct, newly awakened and razor-sharp, took over. Forget comfort. Forget warmth. I had to get out. I swung my legs over the side of the massive bed. I was wearing a simple white shift, clean and warm. My old, drab dress was gone. On a nearby chair, my worn leather boots were set neatly, cleaned of mud and snow. Someone had brought me here, tended to me. Who? And what did they want? The questions circled in my head like vultures. I stood, my body shaky, and padded across the cold stone floor to a tall silver mirror. The girl who stared back was a ghost. Her skin was pale, her lips tinged with blue, her dark hair a tangled mess. But her eyes, they were different. The fear was still there, but beneath it, something new simmered. A defiant hardness. And the glint, the silver glint my father had warned me about, was no longer a flicker. It was a steady, luminous sheen, like moonlight trapped under ice. The sight of it sent a shiver of a different kind of cold through me. Just then, the heavy oak door creaked open. My head snapped up, my heart leaping into my throat. He filled the doorway, a silhouette of immense power against the torchlight of the hall. He was taller than I remembered, broader. The Alpha King, Kyle Draven. The scent of pine and winter rolled off him, so strong it was almost dizzying. His cold gray eyes landed on me, and the predatory stillness I remembered from the ceremony settled over the room. My first instinct was to cower, to obey the omega inside me that screamed to submit. But the thrum of my inner wolf rose to meet my fear, a low, protective growl in the back of my mind. I took a step back, my body recoiling, but then my chin lifted. My fear was real, but so was the fury that was rapidly taking its place. Chapter 6. The King and the Storm. I was drawn to her room by a force I refused to name. My healers had assured me she would live. A foolish, half-frozen omega found at the edge of my territory, scooped up from a blizzard on my command. I didn't even know why I'd given the order. A flicker of something in her eyes at that pathetic ceremony. A spark of defiance where there should have been none. It had intrigued me. A stupid reason to bring a stray into my fortress. A complication I did not need. My council was already restless, and bringing an unknown female here. It was a political misstep. Yet here I was. I pushed the heavy door open, my hand hesitating on the iron handle. I expected to find her asleep, a fragile creature lost in a bed made for kings. I found a storm instead. She stood by the mirror, a pale wraith in a borrowed shift, but there was nothing fragile about the way she held herself. Her spine was straight, her chin lifted, and her eyes. The silver sheen in them was unmistakable now, a mesmerizing, dangerous light. My human mind processed the facts. She was weak, an outcast, a problem. But my wolf was losing its mind. Mate. The word was not a whisper. It was a roar, a soul-shaking tremor that crashed against the inside of my skull, so powerful I had to physically brace myself in the doorway. It was a possessive, primal claiming that demanded I cross the room, mark her, and eliminate any who dared to look at her. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles turning white on the doorframe, fighting the instinct with every ounce of control I had. Because this couldn't be. The fates were cruel, but this was a masterpiece of their malice. My curse, the prophecy that had haunted me since my first mate's death, was clear. My fated mate would be my undoing. I had expected a powerful alpha female, a political rival, a warrior queen who would challenge my throne. I did not expect this. A slip of a girl from a backwater pack, an omega, the lowest of the low. It was an insult, a joke. And yet, the pull was undeniable, a physical chain yanking me toward her. I watched her face her fear. I saw her body flinch, the instinct to submit warring with something else, something wilder. Then, her chin lifted. That spark of defiance I'd seen earlier now burned like a steady flame. Her scent filled the room, not the simple, sweet scent of a typical omega, but something far more complex. It was the smell of ozone after a lightning strike, of hot metal, of a hidden, untamed fire. It was the most intoxicating thing I had ever smelled. And I hated it. I hated her for it. I hated this weakness she had awakened in me. Then she spoke, her voice a raw rasp, but sharp as a shard of ice. I don't need saving. Not from you. The sheer audacity of it struck me silent. No one, not my most trusted warriors, not the oldest alphas, spoke to me with such defiance. And yet, my wolf howled in approval, thrilled by her fire. The internal war raged inside me, the king who saw a threat, the man who saw a woman of impossible spirit, and the beast who simply wanted his mate. I let the king win. I shut down the man and the beast, encasing myself in ice. You misunderstand your position, I said, my voice a low growl. I did not save you. I claimed you. You are now a possession of the crown. I took a step inside, enjoying the flash of fury in her silver eyes. Your choice is simple. Stay here and obey my rules, or return to the blizzard that so generously delivered you to me. I turned and left, slamming the door shut. It wasn't just to intimidate her. It was a barrier, a necessary cage for the both of us. Leaning my head against the cold stone of the hallway, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The prophecy had just begun. Chapter 7. A Gilded Cage. The slam of the door was a final, echoing judgment. I was left standing in the center of the vast chamber, the silence he left behind ringing in my ears. A choice, he'd called it. Stay and obey, or leave and die. What choice was that? It was a leash, gilded and soft, but a leash all the same. A fresh wave of fury, hot and sharp, surged through me. It was a clean fire compared to the suffocating shame of my rejection. That shame had made me want to crumble. This anger made me want to fight. In the hours that followed, servants came and went like ghosts. They brought trays of food I didn't touch and laid out clothes I didn't want, silks and velvets in deep jewel tones, fabrics so fine they felt like water against my skin. They were beautiful, but they felt like a costume for a part I didn't know how to play. To wear them felt like an erasure of the girl with calloused hands and soot on her brow. Still, I put on a deep green tunic because my simple shift was too thin, and because defiance had its limits when you were a prisoner. With a new determination solidifying in my chest, I decided I would not be a docile captive waiting in a pretty room. My immediate goal was to learn the layout of this fortress, to understand the shape of my prison. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a weakness, a way out. I slipped out of the chamber, my soft new boots making no sound on the cold stone floors. The keep was a labyrinth of echoing halls, soaring arches, and tapestries depicting brutal, bloody battles. Wolves and kings and moons stared down at me from the woven threads, their silent judgment following me everywhere. The few guards and servants I passed stared, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. I was the king's strange new pet, the castoff omega he'd plucked from a snowbank. For 2 days, I walked. I memorized the paths to the kitchens, the great hall, the armory. I charted the guards' patrol routes in my head, and everywhere I went, I felt it. A low, constant hum at the edge of my senses. It was him, Kale. His presence was a weight in the air, a magnetic pull my traitorous inner wolf strained toward. It was a constant reminder of the invisible chain that now tethered me to him. Was this the fated bond they spoke of in stories? If so, it felt less like a blessing and more like a brand. On the 3rd day, I found myself in a part of the keep that was clearly forgotten. Dust lay thick on the floor, and the air was stale and still. A faint, familiar scent pulled me forward, cutting through the mustiness. The smell of cold embers and old iron. My steps quickened. Following the scent down a short, dark corridor, I came to a heavy, iron-banded door. It was unlocked. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest, and I froze. Before me was a forge. It was small, abandoned, shrouded in cobwebs and years of dust. But it was all there. The hearth, the bellows, the quench barrel, the scattered tools, and the anvil. It stood in the center of the room like an ancient altar. I walked towards it, my hand outstretched, and laid my palm flat against its cold, pitted surface. The contact was like a jolt of lightning to my soul. The defiant hum of my wolf, the constant thrum of anxiety and anger, it all settled, focusing into a single, sharp point of purpose. My fingers, soft from days of idleness, itched for the familiar weight of a hammer. This place. This was more than a room. It was an answer. Chapter 8. The Viper's Hiss. The forgotten forge became my sanctuary. For the next week, I spent every waking hour there, claiming the space as my own. I swept away the shrouds of cobwebs, cleaned the tools until the steel beneath the grime gleamed, and cleared the hearth of ancient ash. The work was hard, my muscles ached, and my hands, which had started to soften, were once again becoming calloused. I felt alive. Here, I wasn't the king's prisoner or a cast-off omega. I was a smith. This place gave me back a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever. I was testing the stiff leather of the bellows one afternoon when a shadow fell across the doorway. I looked up, expecting a guard or a curious servant. Instead, a woman stood there, her arms crossed, her stance radiating an aggressive confidence I'd only ever seen in alphas. She was tall and stunning, with hair the color of obsidian and eyes like chips of flint. She wore tight-fitting leathers, a warrior's attire, and the scent that rolled off her was of ozone and barely contained hostility. This was Lady Callista, the king's beta and the lead warrior of his guard. I knew this because the servants whispered her name with a mixture of fear and reverence. They said she was as deadly as she was beautiful. Her flint-like eyes raked over me, from my worn boots to the smudge of soot on my cheek. A slow, cruel smile curled her lips. So this is where the king's little stray has been hiding, playing with tools? How quaint. I said nothing, my hand tightening on the wooden handle of the bellows. The air in the small forge crackled with a sudden tension. As a result of my silence, she took a step inside, her movements sleek and predatory, like a panther entering a rabbit's den. "I don't understand what he sees in you," she continued, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "A half-starved Omega with dirt under her nails. He brings you here, clothes you, feeds you from his own table. And for what? Do you really think you belong here?" Her words were designed to hurt, each one a poisoned dart aimed at the old wounds of my rejection. The familiar shame, the feeling of being worthless and out of place, tried to coil in my stomach. I should have looked away. I should have submitted. My Omega instincts screamed at me to lower my eyes, but I didn't. I thought of the dagger I had forged, the perfect balance of it in my hand. I thought of the solid weight of the anvil beneath my palm. Because I had this place now, a small part of me refused to break. I met her gaze and held it. This defiance seemed to infuriate her more than any verbal retort could have. Her smile vanished. "Let me make this clear," she snarled, stepping closer until she was almost nose to nose with me. "You are nothing, a temporary amusement. You think because you survived a snowstorm you are strong? You are a weed in a garden of roses, and you will be plucked. You? A queen?" She let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of any humor. "You'll be ashes before he ever marks you." The threat was real, a physical thing hanging in the air between us. Just as she raised a hand, her sharp nails glinting in the dim light, a new presence filled the doorway. It was Kale. His shadow engulfed us both, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't speak, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His eyes, cold and gray as a winter storm, fixed on Callista, and she froze, the color draining from her face. He took a step forward and his hand closed around my upper arm. The contact was a shock, a sudden searing heat that shot through my entire body. It wasn't gentle. It was possessive. He pulled me away from Callista, placing me slightly behind him. His protective stance was a shield, but it was also a brand, a clear and public declaration of ownership that left me breathless and terrified. Chapter 9. The Alpha's Test. Dragging her from the forge, my fingers burning where they touched her skin, was a necessary evil. The scent of her, soot and that wild metallic fire, clung to the air, a direct challenge to the icy control I prided myself on. My wolf was a raging inferno under my skin, snarling at Callista for her insolence, for daring to threaten what was mine. The possessiveness was a fury I could barely contain, and I hated it. I hated this weakness, this crack in my armor that this small Omega had become. I needed to know what she was. This was the only justification I could give myself for my actions. The prophecy, my curse, my fated mate who was meant to be my ruin. Was she truly just a frightened Omega who stumbled into a moment of defiance? Or was there more to the silver in her eyes and the fire in her scent? I needed to test her, to break her or see her bend. Because if she was to be my ruin, I wanted to understand the weapon that would be used against me. Without a word, I pulled her all the way to the main training grounds. The open, circular yard was empty at this hour. I released her arm, a sense of loss instantly replacing the burning connection. I stalked to the weapons rack, grabbed 2 wooden practice swords, and tossed one at her feet. It landed with a dull clatter on the packed earth. Her eyes, wide and startled, darted from the sword back to my face. Fear. Good. It was a familiar, manageable emotion. "Fight me," I commanded. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion I was actually feeling. I expected her to refuse, to cry, to plead. It's what any other Omega would do. For a long moment, she just stood there, a deer caught in the eyes of a wolf. I saw the fear, yes. But then, I saw that familiar, infuriating spark ignite in the silver depths of her eyes. Her chin, which had started to tremble, firmed up. Slowly, defiantly, she bent and picked up the sword. Her grip was all wrong, a smith's grip, not a warrior's. But her stance was surprisingly solid. Her feet were planted, her center of gravity low, a posture learned from years of bracing herself against the force of a hammer blow. It was unconventional, but it was not weak. I lunged. My movements were a blur of speed and power, an attack designed to end the fight before it began. I expected her to stumble, to drop the sword, to cower. She did none of those things. She moved. She didn't try to meet my attack with strength, a foolish and impossible task. Instead, she used her small size to her advantage, ducking under my wide swing with a shocking agility. The move was clumsy, reactive, but it was effective. I was momentarily overextended, and she was no longer where I expected her to be. The duel, if it could be called that, continued in this way. I attacked, she evaded. I used trained sequences and battle-honed techniques. She used instinct. She was a leaf in a hurricane, not fighting the wind but moving with it, twisting and turning, using my own momentum to carry her out of harm's way. She was an underdog, and she fought like one, with wits and desperation, not with practiced skill. My frustration grew with every swing that met only empty air. My wolf, however, was ecstatic. It howled with approval, thrilled by her spirit, by her refusal to break, by her sheer will to survive. In a moment of frustration, I swung low, a sweeping attack meant to take her feet out from under her. As my sword moved, she did something utterly unpredictable. She didn't jump back, she jumped forward into my space, bringing the pommel of her sword up in a short, sharp arc. It connected solidly with the back of my knee. The impact sent a jolt of shock through me. My leg buckled. I didn't fall, my reflexes were too fast for that, but I stumbled, catching myself on one hand. I looked up, breathing heavily, my attack completely forgotten. She stood a few feet away, her chest heaving, the practice sword held in a two-handed white-knuckled grip. She was terrified, but she was unbroken. And she was looking at me not as a submissive omega, but as an opponent. The anger and frustration inside me vanished, replaced by a stunning, unfamiliar feeling. Respect. Chapter 10. Legends and Curses. Days after the duel, the air in the keep had changed. The overt hostility from the court had cooled into a wary watchfulness. And Cale was different. The raw aggression in his gaze when he looked at me had been replaced by a tense, grudging respect that was almost more unsettling. He hadn't spoken to me about the duel, but he had given me a silent, powerful gift. Access to the royal library. It was a concession, an acknowledgement that I was more than the stray he'd dragged from the snow. For me, it was a key, a chance to find answers. My motivation was a burning, desperate need to understand. Why was I an outcast? What was the secret my father guarded with such sorrow? And what was the terror I had seen in Damon's eyes? What was this fire in my blood? I was convinced the answers were not in my future, but in the distant past. So I searched. For hours every day, I lost myself in the scent of old paper and leather, poring over ancient scrolls and crumbling tomes. I read about pack laws, about battle histories, about the lines of succession. And then I found it. It wasn't a book, but a slim, forgotten scroll tied with a faded silver cord. The text spoke of a legend, a whispered myth of a strain of wolves that predated the pack system, the silver wolves. They were said to be powerful beyond measure, their wolves so dominant they could command lesser shifters with a glance. They were creators, warriors, and leaders, but their power bred arrogance. According to the legend, they sought to defy the moon goddess herself, believing their strength made them her equal. As punishment for their hubris, she cursed them. Their power was not taken but sealed away, hidden in their bloodline, destined to bring ruin to any who carried it. The scroll described the sign of the curse, a silver glint in the carrier's eyes. I stared at the delicate script, my hands trembling. A cold dread washed over me. The silver glint in my eyes. My father's fear. Damon's rejection. It wasn't because I was a smith. It was because I was this, a curse. an abomination from a forgotten age. Just as the weight of this revelation threatened to crush me, I heard voices from a nearby alcove. Two of Cale's council members, their tones low and conspiratorial. "Can't be trusted," one of them hissed. "His judgment is clouded. First, he brings the Omega here. Now he spars with her. He forgets the prophecy." The other voice was heavy with grim agreement. The seer's words were clear. His fated mate will be his undoing, just like the first one, right? My blood ran cold. I pressed myself back into the shadows of the bookshelf, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had heard whispers of Cale's first mate, how she had died tragically years ago, but nothing more. His fated mate will be his undoing. The two stories, the two curses, the legend of the silver wolf, and the prophecy of the Alpha King, slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. He was cursed. I was cursed. Was it possible that I was the living, breathing embodiment of his prophesied doom? The thought was a terrifying, suffocating poison, and I knew, with a certainty that stole the air from my lungs, that my presence in this keep was a lit fuse on a bomb that could destroy us all. Chapter 11. The Midpoint Shift. The storm that broke over the fortress that night was a mirror to the tempest in my soul. Rain lashed against the high windows of the keep, and thunder rattled the very stones. Sleep was impossible. The cursed words from the scroll and the whispers of the council members chased each other around my mind, a venomous spiral of fear and destiny. I couldn't stay in that room, that cage. I needed to move. I needed to feel something other than the crushing weight of my newfound knowledge. So I went to the armory. I took a real blade, not a wooden practice sword, but a live, sharpened piece of steel. Its weight in my hand was a familiar comfort, a solid reality in a world that had dissolved into myth and prophecy. I found a deserted great hall, its high ceilings lost in shadow, and I began to practice. I moved through the forms Kyle had shown me, the memory of his body behind mine, his hand over mine, a ghostly heat on my skin. The hiss of the blade cutting through the air was the only sound besides the storm. I didn't hear him approach. One moment I was alone, and the next, he was there. Cale. Standing just beyond the reach of the candlelight, a shadow within the shadows. His presence was so intense it was like the air had suddenly become thicker, charged with lightning. "Your form is sloppy," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. He moved into the light, his gray eyes dark and unreadable. "You're off balance." He came toward me, and my heart began to pound a frantic, heavy rhythm. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of me. Gently, he took the sword from my hand and set it aside. Then he turned back to me, his hands reaching out to correct my stance. His touch was electric, a searing brand on my waist, on my shoulders. He moved behind me, his broad chest pressing against my back, his arm coming around to guide my own. "Your power comes from here," he murmured, his breath a warm whisper against my ear as he pressed a hand low on my stomach. "From your center. Feel it." I couldn't feel anything but him. His heat, his strength, the overwhelming scent of pine and winter that clouded my senses. The mate bond, which had been a low hum of resentment, now roared to life, a desperate, aching pull that made me want to lean back into him, to turn and
my wolf was screaming. "Mine. Take her. Claim her. Now." The scent of her, a mix of rain-soaked earth and that intoxicating metallic fire, was driving me insane. Holding her like this, her body pliant and warm against mine, was a sweet form of torture. The desire to turn her in my arms, to crush my mouth to hers, was a physical force I could barely restrain. I could feel the frantic beat of her heart against my chest, a rhythm that echoed my own. She was terrified, and she wanted this as much as I did. And then it came. The curse. It was a sharp, searing pain that erupted in my chest, right over my heart, as if a ghostly blade had been plunged into me. For a split second, the image in front of me blurred. The dark hair that smelled of the storm was replaced by a cascade of blonde silk. The scent of ozone was replaced by the memory of lavender. Lyra, my first mate. I saw her face as she lay dying, her blood on my hands, her last breath a promise that she would wait for me. The prophecy was real. This bond, this desire, it was a beacon for death. The pain, the memory, the absolute, bone-deep terror of losing another mate. It was a tidal wave that shattered my control. My desire to claim her was instantly overwhelmed by a far more powerful instinct, the need to protect her, even if it meant protecting her from myself. "If I take you," I rasped, my voice a broken thing, the words torn from the deepest, most terrified part of my soul. "They will destroy you." I shoved myself away from her, the separation of physical agony. Her shocked, confused face was a dagger in my gut. I couldn't explain. I couldn't let her see the utter devastation inside me, so I ran.
Chapter 12. The Truth in the Scars. He fled as if I were the source of his pain, a ghost he was trying to outrun. But his agony lingered in the air, a palpable thing that clung to the shadows of the great hall. The girl I had been, the one who would have cowered in confusion, was gone. The girl who stood there now, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and a fierce, burgeoning strength, would not let him run. I needed to understand. His pain had felt too real, too raw to be a weapon against me. It was a wound. I followed him. My soft boots were silent as I moved through the keep, tracking the faint traces of his scent and the raging storm of his presence. I found him in a private windowless training room at the base of the North Tower. The only light came from a single torch, casting violent shadows on the stone walls. He was attacking a practice dummy, a mannequin stuffed with straw and bound in leather. It wasn't training. It was destruction. He moved with a savage grace, his bare hands ripping and tearing at the dummy, his growls low and guttural, the sounds of a beast in torment. I stood in the doorway, my presence a quiet intrusion on his private hell. "Leave," he snarled without turning, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "Now." I should have been afraid. A part of me was. But a larger part of me, the part that had seen the utter devastation in his eyes, refused to back down. I took a step into the room. "No." He whirled on me then, his gray eyes blazing with a feral light. His chest was heaving, his knuckles were bloody. "I said, leave!" he roared, the sheer force of his voice shaking the very air. I flinched, but I held my ground. My own voice, when it came, was surprisingly steady. "I am not afraid of you, Kale." And then, a guess, a shot in the dark that came from a place of pure instinct. "And I am not her." Those 4 words did what his rage could not. They broke him. The feral light in his eyes flickered and died, the tension draining from his powerful frame as if his strings had been cut. He stared at me, his breath still coming in ragged gasps, his face a mask of utter desolation. He finally sagged against the wall, sliding down to sit on a low stone bench, his head in his hands. I approached him slowly, cautiously, as one would a wounded wolf. I didn't speak, just stood before him, waiting. After a long, heavy silence, he finally spoke, his voice so low I could barely hear it over the distant storm. "Her name was Lyra," he began, his voice rough with unshed grief. "She was my first mate, my bonded." He looked up at me then, and the scars I saw in his eyes were deeper than any I had ever seen on a warrior's skin. "There was an assassination attempt, a poisoned blade meant for me. She saw it. She was faster than my guards. She threw herself in front of me." He choked on the words, the memory a fresh wound. "She died in my arms, and the seer said her death was the beginning of the prophecy, a curse, that my mate bond was a beacon that called death to my door, that my next fated mate would be my ruin." The truth settled over me, heavy and devastating. He wasn't a monster. He was a man shackled by grief, haunted by a ghost, and terrified by a prophecy. He pushed me away not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate, broken desire to protect me. My anger, my resentment, it all dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He and we were not king and captive. We were two sides of the same cursed coin. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, to tell him he wasn't alone, a frantic, pounding fist rattled the chamber door. "Your Majesty!" a guard's urgent voice called out. "Rogues, hundreds of them! They've breached the southern wall! It's your half-brother! He's leading them!" Chapter 13. The Forge in Wartime. The urgent, clanging peal of the alarm bell sent a shockwave of panic through the keep. The moment of raw connection between me and Cale shattered. He was gone in a blur of motion, his grief and vulnerability replaced in an instant by the cold, hard mask of the king. He barked orders, his voice a weapon, and warriors materialized from the shadows to flank him. He left me in the training room without a backward glance, a soldier leaving a civilian behind as he runs toward the battle. The sounds of fighting, of steel on steel, of furious snarls and screams of pain, erupted from the southern part of the fortress. For a heartbeat, I was frozen. My first instinct, the Omega's instinct, was to run, to hide, to find the safest corner and wait for the storm to pass. But the girl who had faced down the Alpha King in a duel, the smith who found solace in fire and steel, refused to cower. My fear was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but another feeling was stronger, a fierce, wild protectiveness. These people were not my pack. This was not my home. But they were being attacked, and I was inside their walls. So I ran, not away from the sounds of battle, but towards its heart. The main armory was chaos. Warriors streamed in and out, grabbing weapons, their faces grim. A harried-looking man with a huge, graying beard, the keep's master smith, was shouting orders, trying to manage the frantic demand for repairs. I saw the problem immediately. Blades were notched, shield straps were severed, spearheads were loose. For every warrior fighting, it seemed another was waiting, disarmed and useless. Without a second thought, I pushed through the crowd and ran to the place I now considered my own, my forge. I stoked the embers with the bellows until they roared back to life. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't wait for an order. I grabbed a broken sword from a discard pile, heated the steel, and set to work. The familiar rhythm of the hammer was a calming force in the middle of the madness. Thud, thud, thud. I worked with a speed and focus that was born of a lifetime of practice. My fear was channeled into the fire, my anger into the hammer, my desperation into the shaping of the steel. Before long, the other smiths stopped and stared. I moved like a woman possessed, sharpening, tempering, and repairing with an efficiency they couldn't match. A guard thrust a shield with a broken handle at me. I had it fixed in minutes. Another brought a sword with a chipped edge. I ground it back to a razor-sharp point. I wasn't a warrior, but I could arm them. I wasn't a leader, but I could serve. For the first time since being cast out, I felt a sense of purpose, of belonging, of being a part of a pack fighting for its survival. In the midst of the controlled chaos, a new group of defenders stumbled in from the southern wall, hauling a cart of salvaged weapons. Their faces were smeared with dirt and blood, and among them, my heart stopped. It was my father. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a terror that had nothing to do with the battle. Our gazes locked for a single shattering second. He wasn't fighting. He looked like a man who had been caught somewhere he never should have been. Before I could call out his name, the alarm bell's frantic ringing slowed to a steady, rhythmic toll. The immediate attack had been repelled. The keep was safe, for now. But as I stared at my father's retreating back, I knew a new battle was just beginning. Chapter 14. The Bitter Truth. The adrenaline of the battle slowly gave way to a bone-deep exhaustion. The keep was a hive of activity, tending to the wounded and securing the breached wall. But I moved through it all in a daze, my eyes searching for only one person. I found him near the hastily constructed barricade at the southern wall, his hands stacking stones with a frantic, desperate energy. My father. He looked up as I approached, and the fear in his eyes was so profound, so absolute, it stole the air from my lungs. He looked like a man staring at his own executioner. "Celine," he choked out, his voice a dry whisper. I didn't have the energy for anger. All I had was a hollow ache in my chest that demanded an answer. "Why?" I asked, my own voice barely audible over the sounds of repair. "At the ceremony. You just stood there. You let them cast me out. And now, you're here. What is happening? What is the secret you were so afraid of?" He flinched as if I had struck him, his gaze darting around nervously. "This is not the place. There is no other place," I insisted, a hysterical edge creeping into my voice. "My home is gone. My life was destroyed. I deserve to know why." His shoulders slumped in utter defeat. He led me away from the wall, into the quiet solitude of a small, dead-end tunnel used for storage. The air was cold and damp. He wouldn't look at me, staring instead at the rough stone walls as the truth finally, horribly spilled out of him. "Our bloodline. It's not like the others," he began, his voice trembling. "It carries a curse, or a gift depending on the stories. We are descended from the silver wolves." The words from the scroll echoed in my mind. He saw the flicker of recognition in my eyes and nodded grimly. "I tried to protect you from it. I taught you to hide it, to control the fire, to never let anyone see the truth of what you are, because I knew people were looking for it." He finally met my gaze, his eyes swimming with tears. "Kale's half-brother, a ruthless alpha named Malachi. He's obsessed with the old legends. He has been searching for a living silver wolf for years. He believes our blood can be used in a dark ritual. A ritual to create an unstoppable army, to give him the power to overthrow his brother." The pieces of the puzzle slammed together, forming a picture of unimaginable betrayal. "Damon," I whispered, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. My father nodded, a sob catching in his throat. "I went to him. I told him what you were. I begged him to reject you. I thought if you were publicly shamed, cast out, you would run, disappear. You would be safe because no one would want you. Disgrace was better than being hunted, better than being turned into a sacrifice on Malachi's altar. I never imagined you would end up here, in the heart of the very conflict I was trying to save you from." The world tilted on its axis. My rejection. The worst moment of my life. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was a calculated plan. A betrayal born of a twisted, misguided love. The one person in the world I thought I could trust had orchestrated my ruin. The grief was a physical blow, so immense I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't feel anything but the shattering of my own heart. As I stood there, reeling, lost in the abyss of his confession, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Warriors appeared, their armor glinting in the torchlight. At their lead was Lady Callista. A smug, triumphant smile played on her lips. "Celine," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "By order of the council, you are under arrest for treason." Chapter 15. The King's Choice. The fury of the battle still thrummed under my skin. We had pushed them back, but the cost was high. My half-brother Malachi had tasted the weakness in our southern defenses, and he would be back. I stood before the throne, my council of alphas arguing around me, their voices a swarm of angry bees. They spoke of retaliation, of reinforcing patrols, of rooting out the traitors who must have aided the attack from within. I listened, my mind a cold machine of strategy and logistics. And then the throne room doors burst open. Callista strode in, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. Behind her, flanked by two of my personal guard, was Celine. She looked shattered. Her face was pale, her silver eyes wide with a grief so profound it was like a physical wound. This wasn't the look of a frightened Omega, nor was it the look of my defiant mate. This was the look of someone whose world had been utterly destroyed. My wolf rose up, a protective roar in my chest, demanding to know who had hurt her. "Your Majesty," Callista announced, her voice ringing with authority. "The traitor has been found." A silence fell over the council. Callista shoved a rolled parchment into my hands. A letter, found on the body of a rogue captain. It details the weaknesses of the southern wall, the patrol schedules of the guard, and it is signed with her mark. She then produced a small, beautifully crafted dagger. "This was found in the rogue's belt. The master smith has confirmed it is her work. She aided them. She is the reason for the attack." The council erupted. The words were a torrent of accusation and fear. "The Omega is the curse. She is the ruin the prophecy spoke of. She opened the gates for them." They were terrified, looking for a scapegoat, and Callista had just handed them one on a silver platter. My logical mind, the king, saw the situation for what it was. The evidence was convenient, almost too convenient, but it was tangible. In a time of war, a leader had to be decisive. Executing a traitor, even a potential one, would solidify my authority and calm the panic. Appeasing my council was the smart political move. But my wolf was laughing. It knew. It had known from the moment I first saw her that she was fire, that she was defiance, that she was strength hidden in a small frame. And my heart? The man who had seen her stand against him in a duel, who had felt her tremble in his arms, who had seen the raw pain in her eyes just moments ago. He knew this was a lie. This profound grief on her face was not the mark of a traitor. It was the mark of a victim. Celine's gaze finally lifted to meet mine. Her eyes were not pleading. They were not begging for mercy. They were filled with an utter, devastating despair. She expected me to abandon her, just like everyone else had. In that moment, she believed I would be the one to swing the final axe, to confirm what she already believed, that she was alone and destined to be cast out. The council fell silent, waiting for my judgment. Callista watched me, a triumphant glint in her eyes. The entire keep held its breath. I made my choice. I descended the steps of the throne, my gaze never leaving Celine's. I walked past the shocked faces of my council members, ignoring Callista's hiss of outrage. I stopped directly in front of her, close enough to feel the tremor that ran through her body. I was the king, and she was my mate. I turned my head, my eyes locking with Callista's, my voice a low, deadly growl that promised death. "Touch her," I commanded, "and you answer to me." Chapter 16. The Falcon's Snare. The aftermath of Cale's declaration was a deafening silence. The council was stunned. Callista's face was a mask of pure fury, and I was a leaf caught in a hurricane, swept up in a storm I couldn't comprehend. Cale's command was absolute. He had two of his most trusted warriors escort me back to my chamber, their faces grim and unreadable. His protection was a shield, yes, but as the heavy door locked behind me, it felt more like the final closing of a cage. I was his to protect, his to command, his to imprison. I paced the room, a wild energy thrumming under my skin. The revelations of the day crashed over me in waves, my father's betrayal, my cursed bloodline, Callista's venom, and now, Cale's public claim. It was too much. What happened now? Was I a prisoner? A guest? A mate? The lines were so blurred they had ceased to exist. All I knew was that I was trapped in the eye of a political and emotional storm that threatened to tear Cale's kingdom apart. After what felt like hours, a quiet knock came at the door. A servant girl I'd never seen before entered, carrying a tray with a small meal and a goblet of water. She kept her eyes downcast, her face strangely blank, her movements stiff and automatic. A prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. My inner wolf, agitated and restless, let out a low, silent warning. "The king commanded that you eat," she murmured, her voice flat and lifeless. I wasn't hungry, but I was suddenly overcome with a strange exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. Perhaps it was just the stress of the day finally catching up to me. I took the goblet of water, my throat suddenly parched. The water was cool and clean, but as I drank, the room began to feel wrong. The edges of my vision softened and blurred. The crackling of the fire in the hearth seemed to grow distant, as if I were hearing it from the bottom of a well. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I stumbled, my hand reaching out for the bedpost to steady myself. The servant girl hadn't moved. She was just watching me, her expression still unnervingly blank. Drugged. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Just then, shadows detached themselves from the darkest corners of the chamber. They weren't Kale's guards. They wore black from head to toe, their faces covered, their movements silent and serpentine. Assassins. I opened my mouth to scream, but my tongue was thick and heavy, and only a choked gasp came out. I tried to fight, to summon the defiant fire that had faced down the king, but my limbs were filled with lead. My body wouldn't obey. I collapsed to my knees, my vision tunneling to a single point of darkness. As my consciousness faded, a figure stepped out from behind the assassins, his boots making no sound on the stone floor. He knelt in front of me, his hand gripping my chin, forcing my head up. He had Kale's strong jaw, his dark hair, but his eyes were filled with a cruel, triumphant madness. Malachi, Kale's half-brother. "There you are," he whispered, his voice a triumphant hiss. "The little silver wolf. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Darkness swallowed me whole. I awoke to the chilling seep of damp stone against my skin. I was in a cell, the air thick with the smell of mildew and despair. Heavy iron cuffs bound my wrists and ankles, and he was there, sitting on a wooden stool just beyond my reach, watching me. Malachi. "Welcome back," he said with a smirk. "Don't worry, I have no intention of killing you. You're far too valuable for that." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a fanatical light. "Your blood, your power, it's the key. With it, I will forge an army that will make my brother's warriors look like children. You are not my enemy, little wolf. You are the instrument of my victory." Chapter 17. A King Undone Rage. It was a white-hot, blinding inferno, the likes of which I had not felt since Lyra's death. I stood in Celine's empty chamber, the scent of her fear a ghost in the air. 2 of my best guards lay dead in the corridor, their throats slit. The serving girl was gone, and so was she. Taken. Stolen from a locked room in the heart of my keep. The betrayal was so deep, so absolute, it was a poison in the very stones of my home. Malachi. It had to be him. My first command was to assemble the war party. My only thought was to hunt him down, to rip him apart with my bare hands, to bring her back. My wolf was in full agreement, a savage beast clawing at the bars of my control, roaring her name. Mate. Find our mate. Kill them all. But as I strode into the council hall, ready to ride into whatever hell Malachi had waiting, I was met not with loyal warriors, but with a wall of defiance. "You would risk the entire kingdom for her?" Callista's voice was sharp as steel, her face rigid with fury. She had the full support of the other alphas, their faces grim and mutinous. "We just repelled an attack. Malachi's main force is still out there, waiting. And you want to lead our best warriors on a wild chase for a traitor?" "She is not a traitor," I roared, the force of my voice shaking the rafters. "She was framed." "And your proof is what?" another alpha challenged. "Your bond?" "A bond the seer herself prophesied would be your ruin. We saw your face when you chose her over the council's judgment. Your obsession with this Omega is going to be the death of us all." They were using my own laws, my own alliances against me. I was a king, but I was not a tyrant. I couldn't simply execute them for questioning my command, not without risking a civil war that would hand my brother the very victory he sought. I was trapped, a wolf in a snare of my own making. Every argument I made, they countered with logic. The keep is vulnerable. We must consolidate our power. We cannot afford to be weakened by a rescue mission for 1 Omega. They didn't understand. She wasn't 1 Omega. She was the other half of my soul. And because of the stress, because of the rage, because of the soul-deep terror of her being in Malachi's hands, the curse chose that moment to awaken. It started as a low burn in my chest, a familiar, dreaded heat. But then it flared, a searing, white-hot agony that stole my breath. I staggered, my hand flying to my chest, a growl of pain ripping from my throat. The world flickered. I saw flashes of Lyra's blood on my hands, the scent of lavender and death. And then, overlaid on that horrific memory, a new vision. Celine. Her silver eyes dimmed with pain, chained to a stone altar. The pain was so intense I could barely stand. I was a king, undone. My mate was a captive. My kingdom was on the verge of rebellion, and my own body, my own past, was betraying me. I was losing everything. Defeated, for now, I stormed from the council hall, leaving them to their treacherous deliberations. I retreated to the solitude of my war room, the agony in my chest slowly subsiding to a dull, throbbing ache. I stared at the massive map spread across the table, at the vast wilderness where Malachi could be hiding. I had never felt so powerless in my entire life. Chapter 18. The Whisper in the Dark. Time ceased to have meaning in the darkness. There was only the cold stone, the gnawing hunger, and the dripping sound of water that echoed the slow erosion of my hope. Malachi would visit once a day, a specter of cruelty in the gloom. He didn't hurt me. His weapons were words, each one a carefully crafted poison. "My spies tell me your king has not moved," he would say, his voice a silken caress. "He sits in his fortress while his council debates. It seems a king's crown is heavier than his mate bond." Another time, he smiled. "They call you the curse-bringer now, did you know? Callista has convinced them all that you were the traitor, that you are the source of his ruin. He has chosen his throne, little wolf. He has abandoned you." I tried not to believe him. I clung to the memory of Kale's face in the throne room, the raw fury in his voice as he defended me. But as the days bled into one another, the memory began to fade, worn down by the constant drip of Malachi's poison. It made a sick kind of sense. Why would a king risk a war for me? I was a castoff, a curse, a nobody. I had been abandoned once before. Why would this time be any different? The last ember of hope finally died. He was not coming. I was utterly and completely alone. The defiant hum of my inner wolf, the companion that had raged and fought alongside me, fell silent. It gave up. It resigned itself to our fate. And in that absolute silence, in that profound and total despair, I hit the bottom of the abyss. I was nothing. I was prey, a tool to be used, and a body to be discarded. This was my end. And in that final silent surrender, a new voice spoke. It wasn't the hum of my wolf. It wasn't a thought or a feeling. It was a consciousness, ancient and calm and impossibly powerful, awakening from a slumber that had lasted for centuries. It was the voice of the silver in my eyes, the fire in my blood. It spoke a single, undeniable truth directly into the core of my being. You were never prey. You are the storm. The words were not a comfort. They were a command, a complete reordering of my existence. The despair, the fear, the grief, they didn't vanish. They were consumed, burned away as fuel for a new cold fire. A profound calm power settled over me, a stillness that was more terrifying than any rage. I was no longer a victim waiting for a rescuer. I was no longer a cast-off waiting for a home. I knew, with a clarity that was as sharp and clean as a freshly forged blade, what I was. I looked down at the heavy iron cuffs binding my wrists. A faint silvery light began to glow from beneath my skin, tracing the patterns of my veins. The air grew heavy, the temperature in the cell dropping until I could see my own breath. The iron shackle around my right wrist began to groan, not from physical force, but under the pressure of an immense, unseen power that I was now commanding. My eyes, which I knew had faded to a dull, hopeless brown, flashed with pure, molten silver. Chapter 19. The Storm Unleashed. The voice in my mind was a calm center in the hurricane of my despair. It was not a thought, but a truth. You are the storm, and with that truth came power. I looked at the iron cuffs on my wrists, not as restraints, but as suggestions. An inconvenience. The silvery light that glowed from beneath my skin intensified, and the air in the cell grew heavy, cold, and electric. I focused on the metal, not with my muscles, but with my will. I imagined the iron atoms vibrating, their bonds straining, weakening. A low, groaning sound filled the small space. It was the sound of tortured metal. I pulled. The iron shackle around my right wrist didn't bend. It flowed, twisting like hot taffy before snapping with a sharp crack that echoed off the stone walls. I did the same with the other cuff, and then the ankle restraints. They all broke with the same impossible ease. I was free. I stood in the center of the cell, not as a captive, but as a force. The sharp sound of the breaking metal had not gone unnoticed. I heard the scrape of boots outside, the bark of a confused command. The heavy cell door was thrown open, and two of Malachi's guards filled the doorway, their swords drawn. They froze, their eyes widening at the sight of my broken shackles lying on the floor. "How?" one of them stammered. They didn't get to finish the question. I moved. I was no longer the girl who had clumsily evaded Kale in the training yard. My body was filled with an ancient instinct, a predator's grace I didn't know I possessed. The first guard lunged. I didn't meet his blade. I flowed around it, my hand striking the flat of his sword with a sharp, explosive force. The weapon shattered, the cheap steel no match for the power coursing through me. I used his own momentum to send him crashing into the wall. The second guard was more cautious, but it didn't matter. I could see the fight before it happened. I could see the flaws in his stance, the weakness in his grip, the fear in his eyes. I moved inside his reach, my hand striking his throat in a single, precise blow. He collapsed without a sound. It was brutal, efficient, and utterly terrifying. But the fear was a distant thing now, an emotion that belonged to the girl I used to be, the girl who was prey. Following the faint torchlight, I made my way out of the dungeons, a ghost of silver and fury. Every guard I encountered met the same fate. I was a storm, and I was washing away everything in my path. I was no longer Selene, the castoff Omega. I was the living embodiment of the legend my father had feared, the power my ancestors had been cursed with. I was a silver wolf, awakened and unleashed. As I reached the upper levels of Malachi's crumbling fortress, a new sound reached my ears, the unmistakable clang of a large-scale battle, the roars of dozens of enraged shifters, the screams of the dying, the sounds of war. Through an arrow slit, I saw them. Kale's warriors, a wave of black and gray fur, were crashing against the fortress walls. Kale. He had come. A part of me, the small, lonely girl I had been, felt a surge of relief. But the storm inside me felt only a cold, hard purpose. He had not come to rescue me, he had come to fight a war, and I was heading out to end it. Chapter 20. The Traitor's End. I burst through the main doors of the keep and into the chaos of the courtyard. The battle was a swirling vortex of violence and desperation. Kale's elite warriors, moving with the disciplined fury of a true pack, were cutting a swath through Malachi's disorganized army of rogues and mercenaries. The air was thick with the scent of blood, sweat, and the coppery tang of fear. It was a hellish, brutal symphony of war, but I was not a part of that symphony. I was a singular, discordant note of pure, focused rage. My silver eyes scanned the battlefield, ignoring the lesser skirmishes, searching for only one person. And then I saw him. Malachi. He stood near the main gate, a two-handed battle axe in his hands, directing his forces like a mad conductor. A cruel, ecstatic smile was plastered on his face. He was reveling in the destruction, in the chaos he had created. I moved towards him. Rogues tried to intercept me, drawn by the strange silvery light that seemed to cling to my skin. They were gnats in a hurricane. I dispatched them with a cold, terrifying efficiency, my movements a blur of deadly grace. I was not a warrior. I was a weapon. Malachi finally saw me. His smile widened, his eyes gleaming with a greedy, fanatical light. "There she is," he roared over the din of battle. The ritual worked even without my help. My perfect little weapon. He clearly thought my power was something he could control, something he had unlocked. He was wrong. I stopped a dozen feet from him, the bodies of his fallen rogues a testament to his mistake. "This power was never for you," I said, my voice quiet, yet it cut through the noise of the battle like a razor. He laughed. "Brave words for a stray Omega. You may have the power, but you lack the skill to wield it. I will break you, and then I will take what is mine." He charged. He was a true alpha, a whirlwind of muscle and rage, his axe scything through the air in a deadly arc. The old Celine would have been paralyzed with terror. But the storm inside me met his rage with a cold, unyielding calm. I didn't have his strength, so I used my wits. I didn't have his skill, so I used my instinct. I remembered my duel with Kale. I remembered a lifetime of being an underdog. I evaded his first strike, the wind from his axe whispering past my ear. I used my blacksmith's knowledge, my eyes noting the small, almost invisible stress fractures in his armor, the weak points at the joints. I used my agility, forcing him to overextend, to commit to attacks that left him vulnerable. The fight was a brutal, desperate dance. He was strength, and I was speed. He was rage, and I was precision. He was a sledgehammer, and I was a dagger. He finally managed to land a blow, the flat of his axe catching me in the ribs. The impact sent a blinding flash of pain through me, and I stumbled, gasping for air. He loomed over me, his face triumphant. "It's over," he snarled, but as he raised his axe for the final blow, I saw my opening. His stance was too wide, his weight shifted too far forward. It was the same mistake Kale had made. While he was focused on the kill, I surged up from the ground, not with a weapon, but with a broken spearhead I'd scooped up from the dirt. It wasn't a warrior's move, it was a smith's, finding the flaw and striking with everything I had. I drove the sharpened point up and under his arm, into the weak point of his armor and deep into his heart. His eyes went wide with shock and disbelief. The axe fell from his nerveless fingers. He looked down at the spearhead buried in his chest, and then back at me. He collapsed at my feet, the traitor king slain by the castoff Omega. Chapter 21. To die as yours. The moment Malachi fell, the tide of the battle turned. His rogue army, a force held together only by his ambition and dark promises, faltered. Seeing their leader dead, their morale shattered. Some threw down their weapons and surrendered. Others simply broke and fled back into the wilderness. The fighting died down into a series of scattered, desperate skirmishes. I stood over my vanquisher's body, my chest heaving, every muscle in my body screaming in agony. I was battered, bleeding from a dozen small cuts, my ribs a blaze of fire, but I was unbroken. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, I saw him. Kyle. He was fighting like a demon, a whirlwind of black fur and steel, but he was hurt. A deep gash bled freely from his side, staining his leathers a dark, glistening crimson. His movements were slowing, a fatal flaw in the chaos of a battlefield. I saw a rogue, a massive, scarred brute, notice the same thing I did. The rogue disengaged from his current opponent and lunged, his sword aimed at Kale's exposed back. A new surge of adrenaline, born of pure, protective fury, flooded my veins. No, I moved. I don't know where the strength came from. I launched myself forward, intercepting the rogue just as his blade was about to find its home. My borrowed dagger met his sword with a jarring clang. He was stronger, but I was faster. I used his momentum against him, twisting under his guard and driving my blade into his thigh. He howled in pain and collapsed. Kale turned, his gray eyes wide with shock as he took in the scene. He finished his own opponent and stumbled toward me, the last of his strength finally giving out. He fell against me, his weight a heavy, grounding presence. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him up, my small frame the only thing keeping the Alpha King from collapsing into the mud and snow.
I saw her, across the blood-soaked courtyard standing over my brother's corpse. She was not the Omega I had found in the snow. She was a goddess of war, her face smeared with dirt and blood, her silver eyes blazing with a power that made the very air around her tremble. My wolf, my soul, howled in triumph and awe. Mate, queen, ours. I fought my way toward her, a single-minded purpose driving me through the last dregs of the battle. But the world was starting to tilt, the edges of my vision going gray. The wound in my side was deeper than I'd thought. I felt the shift in the air behind me, the telltale sign of an attack. But my body was too slow to respond. And then, she was there. A silver-eyed blur of motion, a shield, a savior. She saved me. I finally reached her, my strength gone, and collapsed against her. She held me, her small frame impossibly strong, a bastion in the middle of the carnage. All my fears, the curse, the prophecy, the belief that she would be my ruin, they were all lies. She wasn't my ruin, she was my salvation. I looked up at her fierce, beautiful face, the woman who had saved herself, and then saved me. The battle was over. My kingdom was secure, and I was dying, but I was with her. That was all that mattered. My hand, slick with my own blood, came up to cup her cheek. Her skin was soft beneath the grime. The storm in her eyes softened, replaced by a fierce, protective love that took my breath away. "If I die tonight," I whispered, my voice a ragged, failing breath, "I want to die as yours." Chapter 22. The Queen in the Snow. The battle was over, but my war had just begun. I survived the assassins, the rogues, and the blade that should have killed me. Now, I faced my council. My healers had worked their magic, their potions and stitches closing the gash in my side. But the true wound was the political chaos my brother had left in his wake. I sat in my command tent, pitched in the center of the ruined courtyard, and gave my first and only order. "Bring her to me." She entered moments later. The grime of battle had been washed away, and she wore a simple gray tunic, but nothing could hide the new power that radiated from her. It was in the calm certainty of her silver eyes, in the straight line of her spine, in the way she walked not as a guest but as someone who belonged. She was magnificent, and she was the flashpoint for the argument that followed her into the tent. "She is a curse!" An elder from the council spat, his voice trembling with fear. "The prophecy has come to pass. Her presence brought this destruction upon us." Callista, her face a mask of cold fury, stepped forward. "She fought, yes, but a rabid wolf still has teeth. It doesn't make it any less of a threat. For the good of the kingdom, Majesty, you must cast her out. Reject her now before she truly becomes your ruin." They all clamored in agreement, a chorus of fear and suspicion. They saw her as a weapon that had misfired, a danger that needed to be neutralized. They still saw a castoff Omega, a stray, a liability. They did not see what I saw. I saw my mate. I saw my queen. I saw the storm that had saved us all. I rose to my feet, the pull on my stitches a dull, angry pain. I ignored it. I walked to Celine, took her hand, and pulled her close. Her skin was warm, her presence a calming balm on my ragged soul. I led her from the suffocating confines of the tent, out into the open courtyard. The snow from the blizzard had melted, but a fresh, light dusting had fallen during the battle, covering the blood-soaked ground in a blanket of pure, clean white. My warriors, the council, the captured rogues. They all watched. I stopped in the center of it all, in the same kind of snow where her own pack had abandoned her, and I spoke, my voice carrying with all the power of the Alpha King. "You see a castoff Omega," I declared, my voice ringing in the cold, clear air. "I see the woman who saved your king. You see a curse. I see a power that brought a traitor to his knees. This Omega you scorned is no Omega." I turned to look at her, my heart overflowing with a love so fierce it was a physical force. "She is my mate. She is my queen. A silver wolf who commands my respect and defies your fear." Then, I lowered my head.
And I felt his teeth, sharp and possessive, graze the sensitive skin of my neck, just above the curve of my shoulder. I held my breath. He didn't hesitate. He bit down. There was no pain. There was only a brilliant, searing light that erupted behind my eyes. It was a flash of pure energy, a flood of emotion that was not my own. I felt his love, a tidal wave of it, fierce and protective and absolute. I felt his relief, a deep, shuddering release of a pain he had carried for years. I felt his pride, a roaring fire that burned away my last lingering doubts. The bond between us, that tense, invisible chain, snapped into its final glorious form, a conduit of pure, unconditional acceptance. In that brilliant light, I felt the last of his curse, the cold, lonely grief for Lyra, the fear that had shackled him for so long. It didn't shatter. It settled, transforming into a warm, peaceful memory, finally laid to rest. And the wound in my own soul, the jagged hole left by Damon's rejection, finally healed. It was filled and smoothed over, not by his love, but by the undeniable truth of my own worth that his love now reflected back at me. I was not a castoff. I was chosen. I was cherished. I was his. He lifted his head, a single drop of his own blood sealing the mark. Around us, in the snow-dusted courtyard, every warrior, every elder, every single wolf sank to one knee. Chapter 23. Rebuilding a Kingdom. In the weeks that followed, a fragile peace settled over the fortress, and the hard work of rebuilding began. Stone by stone, we repaired the walls. Soul by soul, we healed the pack. I sat in the throne room, but I was not alone. Celine was always at my side, her presence a quiet strength that anchored me. She did not rule behind me, but with me. Her counsel was not that of a warrior, but of a creator. She understood that a kingdom was not just held together by strength, but forged by purpose. My first act as a king with a queen was to pass judgment. Callista and the Alphas who had sided with her were brought before us. They were defiant, their eyes still full of resentment. The old Kale, the king who ruled through fear and absolute authority, would have had them executed for their treason. It was the law. It was what they expected. But that night, after the battle, Selena had spoken to me of the difference between justice and vengeance. Justice rebuilds, she'd said. Vengeance only creates more ruins. So I showed them a mercy that stunned the court. "You have betrayed your king and your kingdom," I declared, my voice echoing in the silent hall. "But your blood is still of this pack, and your strength is still needed. You are hereby stripped of your titles and your lands. You will be sent to the northern garrison, at the edge of the blighted lands where you will serve for the rest of your days protecting the border. You will be warriors again, not politicians. That is my judgment." Callista's face was a mask of disbelief and fury, but she was led away without another word. A new precedent had been set. The rule of Kyle Draven was no longer just about power. It was about strength tempered with wisdom. It was about Celine. I watched as she found her place among my people. She was not a traditional Luna who hosted teas and managed the household. She spent her days in the forges, her face smudged with soot, her voice clear and confident as she directed the smiths. She designed a new, stronger alloy for the gates. She created a more efficient process for crafting arrowheads. She was respected, not because of the mark on her neck, but because of the skill in her hands and the keen intelligence in her mind. One afternoon, I saw her father approach her near the main forge. Torin had been allowed to stay, a broken man working the lower bellows as his quiet penance. He held out a small, beautifully crafted pendant of a howling wolf, its surface gleaming like liquid silver. He spoke to her, his voice too low for me to hear, his head bowed in a lifetime of regret. I watched as Selene took the pendant. She didn't embrace him. She didn't offer the easy forgiveness he likely didn't deserve, but she nodded, a quiet, sad acceptance in her eyes. She understood that some wounds could never be truly healed. They just became scars you learned to carry. That evening, I found her standing on the newly repaired southern wall, looking out at the vast, peaceful forest. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the promise of spring. I came to stand beside her, our shoulders brushing. We didn't speak for a long time. We didn't need to. We were two rulers, two mates, two survivors watching over our kingdom, together. Chapter 24. Forged in fire and snow spring arrived like a quiet promise fulfilled. The last of the snow melted away, revealing the vibrant green of the new world beneath. The kingdom was healing, and so was I. The whispers and stares that had once followed me through the halls of the keep had been replaced by nods of respect and genuine smiles. I was no longer the king's stray. I was their queen. My days were spent in the place that felt most like home, the Royal Forge. It was a new building, a magnificent space of high ceilings and open windows that Kale had ordered built for me. It was filled with the finest tools, the best coal, and the brightest sunlight. It was a gift that told me he didn't just love me. He saw me. Here, I was not just a queen, but a master of my craft. I was working on a ceremonial blade, a gift for the first mating ceremony of the new season. The hammer rose and fell in a steady, joyful rhythm. The power that lived in my blood, the silver fire that I had once feared, was now a part of my art. I could feel the steel on a deeper level, sensing its strength, its flaws, its potential. It allowed me to create things of impossible beauty and strength, blades that held a faint silvery light of their own. Young Omegas, once destined for lives of quiet service, now came to me, their eyes bright with a new kind of hope. They didn't just ask about mates. They asked for apprenticeships. Together, we were forging a new definition of what an Omega could be. The heavy doors of the forge swung open, and Kyle entered, the afternoon sun silhouetting his powerful frame. He wasn't dressed in the formal leathers of the king, but in a simple tunic and trousers. He was here not as my king, but as my mate. He crossed the forge, his eyes filled with a deep, quiet love that still made my heart skip a beat. He handed me a goblet of cool water, his calloused thumb brushing gently against mine. "How is she?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. He wasn't asking about me. He was asking about the blade. I ran a gloved hand down the length of the steel, feeling the perfect balance, the life humming within the metal. "She is strong," I replied, a smile touching my lips. I looked from the powerful blade to my own reflection in its polished, mirror-like surface. I no longer saw a lost girl with fear in her eyes. I saw a woman with silver in her veins. I saw a smith. I saw a survivor. I saw a queen. I looked up and met Kale's warm, steady gaze. My king, my partner, my equal. "She is ready,"